We now know why the previous board of OpenAI fired Sam Altman. Listen to this clip by Helen Toner, ex-board member.
When ChatGPT came out, November 2022, the board was not informed in advance about that. We learned about ChatGPT on Twitter. Sam didn't inform the board that he owned the OpenAI startup fund, even though he, constantly was claiming to be an independent board member with no financial interest in the company. On multiple occasions, he gave us inaccurate information about the small number of formal safety processes that the company did have in place, meaning that it was basically impossible for the board to know how well those safety processes were working or what might need to change.
All right, so we have a lot to talk about today. We have new information about why the board fired Sam Altman. We have OpenAI forming their own safety and security committee, and an article in The Economist by former OpenAI board members talking about how worried they are about OpenAI's security and safety. So we're going to talk about all of it today. So I'm going to play a clip of Helen Toner being interviewed by Bilawal Sidhu on the TED AI show. It's a clip of a longer interview. I'll drop a link to the longer interview in the description below. And she's going to talk about some crazy things. Everything from Sam Altman giving inaccurate information about safety procedures within OpenAI to him not mentioning that he actually owns the OpenAI startup fund. And at the end, I want to know, do you think the board was right in firing Sam Altman? So I'm going to play this clip and I'm going to comment it as we listen.
The OpenAI board was not a normal board. It's not a normal company. The board is a nonprofit board that was set up explicitly for the purpose of making sure that the company's public good mission was coming first over profits, investor interests, and other things.
All right, so I'm already going to pause it. So remember, OpenAI was originally set up as a nonprofit. Elon Musk was a big-time donator to this nonprofit. He wanted to actually be a founder and CEO eventually. He's suing OpenAI because he gave them, I think, $100 million, and then they turned around and converted themselves into a for-profit company. They sold half of it to Microsoft, and a lot of people made a lot of money. And so we have Elon Musk suing OpenAI, Sam Altman directly as well. And now we have Helen Toner, former board member, saying a lot of the same things. So let's keep listening.
For years, Sam had made it really difficult for the board to actually do that job by, withholding information, misrepresenting things that were happening at the company, in some cases outright lying to the board. At this point, everyone always says, like what? Give me some examples. And I can't share all the examples, but to give a sense of the kind of thing that I'm talking about, it's things like, when ChatGPT came out, November 2022, the board was not informed in advance about that. We learned about ChatGPT on Twitter.
Okay, that's insane to me if true. Now, obviously, Helen Toner is kind of going on a campaign right now to kind of right her name because a lot of people had no idea why Sam Altman was fired and then eventually came back from this mutiny. Now, I'm going to try to think about this from two sides. One, Sam Altman released ChatGPT to the world without telling the board. He maybe thought the board wasn't going to approve and he wanted to get it out there. That's one take, and that's really bad. He basically just didn't directly lie, but withheld information from the board. Now, another way to think about it, and he has actually said this, when he launched ChatGPT, he thought it wasn't really going to be as big as it was. He thought it was just going to be kind of a small test launch, get some feedback, and then iterate. He had no idea it was going to be a global phenomenon. So in his mind, maybe it wasn't a big idea to just put up this very small experiment using ChatGPT. So those, I think, are probably the two sides of the argument, and it's probably somewhere in between. And I should also mention, other companies and researchers already had access to previous versions of the GPT system.
Sam didn't inform the board that he owned the OpenAI startup fund, even though he, constantly was claiming to be an independent board member with no financial interest in the company.
Okay, that's nuts to me. There's really no way around that. He didn't say that he owned the OpenAI startup fund. He went in front of the Senate and he said,
I have no equity in OpenAI.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. You need a lawyer.
I need a what?
You need a lawyer or an agent.
I'm doing this because I love it.
that was a lie. I don't see any way to spin it in which that isn't just a pure lie. He did have financial interests in the company, maybe not in the quote unquote OpenAI specific entity, but the OpenAI fund he owned. And so they were making investments in other AI companies and he owned that. So he certainly had a financial interest in the success of OpenAI. And of course, it's bad enough to withhold that information from the board, but to also go in front of the Senate and lie? I mean, I don't understand how he's not going to be dragged back in front of the Senate and ask some really hard questions about that. Let's keep watching.
On multiple occasions, he gave us inaccurate information about the small number of formal safety processes that the company did have in place, meaning that it was basically impossible for the board to know how well those safety processes were working or what might need to change. And then, a last example.
Okay, so before she gives the last example, I want to talk about that. So just last week, Ilya Sutskever and Jan Leike both left. Ilya just left quietly and said, hey, thanks for all the time. But Jan did not. And I made a whole video about that. I'll drop a link to that in the description below. But he basically said OpenAI has deprioritized safety and security and has optimized for shiny new things. And the super alignment team, which is responsible for AI safety, was promised a certain amount of compute, so a certain amount of the GPUs. And I think they reneged on that commitment. So all of what Helen Toner is saying kind of aligns with everything that Jan said on his way out. And that is really scary to me. Somebody that is flippant with AI safety and security makes me super nervous, especially since they are the world leader in AI research.
A last example that I can share, because it's been very widely reported, relates to this paper that I wrote, which has been, I think, way overplayed in the press. The problem was that after the paper came out, Sam started lying to other board members in order to try and push me off the board. So it was another example that just really damaged our ability to trust him, and actually only happened in late October last year when we were already talking pretty seriously about whether we needed to fire him. And so, there's kind of more individual examples, and for any individual case, Sam could always come up with some kind of innocuous sounding explanation of why it wasn't a big deal or misinterpreted or whatever. But the end effect was that after years of this kind of thing, all four of us who fired him came to the conclusion that we just couldn't believe things that Sam was telling us. And that's a completely unworkable place to be in as a board, especially a board that is supposed to be providing independent oversight over the company, not just helping the CEO to raise more money. Not trusting the word of the CEO, who is your main conduit to the company, your main source of information about the company, is just totally impossible. So that was kind of the background, the state of affairs coming into last fall. And we had been, working at the board level as best we could to set up better structures, processes, all that kind of thing to try and, improve these issues that we had been having at the board level. But then mostly in October of last year, we had this series of conversations with these executives where the two of them suddenly started telling us about their own experiences with Sam, which they hadn't felt comfortable sharing before, but telling us how they couldn't trust him, about the toxic atmosphere he was creating. They used the phrase psychological abuse.
All right, so I hadn't heard about any of this. I think the two executives that she's talking about are Jan and Ilya. It could be others, but I think it's Jan and Ilya. That's my understanding. And psychological abuse. Now, here's the thing. Sam Altman is extremely well regarded in Silicon Valley. Tons of people have come out on his behalf talking about the times that he went to bat for them, that he was a trusted confidant on different issues. He's an investor in hundreds of companies. So it's a little interesting to hear that he's such a horror to work with, yet so many other people around the industry have had great experiences. Now, I can't make a judgment call on this because I don't know Sam Altman, but there is definitely two stories here. And you never know. Whenever we have these kind of infighting issues, you never know what the actual truth is. You can only triangulate around what is likely to be the closest thing to the truth.
Telling us they didn't think he was the right person to lead the company to AGI, telling us they had no belief that he could or would change, no point in giving him feedback, no point in trying to work through these issues. I mean, they've since tried to kind of minimize what they told us, but these were not casual conversations. They were really serious, to the point where they actually sent us screenshots and documentation of some of the instances they were telling us about, of him lying and being manipulative in different situations. So, this was a huge deal. This was a lot. And we talked it all over very intensively over the course of several weeks. And ultimately just came to the conclusion that the best thing for OpenAI's mission and for OpenAI as an organization would be to bring on a different CEO. And once we reached that conclusion, it was very clear to all of us that as soon as Sam had any inkling that we might do something that went against him, he, would pull out all the stops, do everything in his power to undermine the board, to prevent us from, even getting to the point of being able to fire him.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. Within just a few days of him getting fired on that Friday, he was back in the Iron Throne, leading OpenAI once again. And so much happened over that one weekend. I made an entire video about it. I'll drop that in the description below as well. So, a bunch of new information from Helen Toner. Thank you once again to the sponsor of this video, Careerist. If you want to invest in yourself and earn 70K plus in just 4 months, Careerist is a great opportunity. They will train you in the profession of software QA engineering, and investing in yourself is the best investment. So if you want to get into the tech industry, this is a great path to do so. You don't need any technical or coding experience to start on this journey. And software QA basically means that you're going to do extensive testing on software, which is an essential role needed by all software companies. And the demand for software QA engineers is only increasing, which provides extensive opportunities for growth. Salaries for this role in the US market start from $69,000 per year, according to Glassdoor. With Careerist Online Bootcamp, you can gain the necessary knowledge, practice, mentorship, and advice to become a successful tech specialist, regardless of your prior experience or educational background. As a licensed education provider, Careerist offers an interactive software QA course that can be completed in 15 weeks, with personalized guidance from experienced coaches. Over 1,000 graduates have already landed well-paying jobs at major tech companies across 40 different states with Careerist help. So take your first step towards a successful tech career, follow the link in the description below, and use my promo code Matthew Berman to receive a special $600 discount on the course. Invest in yourself, invest in your future, check out Careerist, and thank you again. Now back to the video. Helen Toner and Tasha McCauley wrote an article just a couple days ago in The Economist talking about their concerns with AI safety and specifically around how to run an AI company. So let's take a look at that article. So AI firms mustn't govern themselves, say ex-members of OpenAI's board. For humanity's sake, regulation is needed to tame market forces, argue Helen Toner and Tasha McCauley. And here's the real question, and I'm kind of torn on this question, but let me read it and you tell me what you think in the comments. Can private companies pushing forward the frontier of a revolutionary new technology be expected to operate in the interests of both their shareholders and the wider world? The short answer, unfortunately, my opinion, is no. They cannot. There have been so many companies where when they have to make a decision between shareholder value, which they have a fiduciary duty to deliver, and the greater world, they always choose the shareholder. And let me be clear, I am a capitalist through and through, but there are negative consequences with capitalism. One of the obvious ones is the detriment to just the world, nature. Companies that are optimizing for profit will sacrifice negative effects, negative consequences to animals, to nature in general. And I do believe that, even though I am a capitalist through and through. So in this instance, do you think OpenAI, with a fiduciary duty to shareholders, is also going to think about the betterment of the world and what is optimal for every human being in the world? My guess is probably not. So they go on to talk about being recruited to the board of OpenAI, Tasha in 2018, Helen in 2021. So just to be clear, Helen Toner, was only with the company for a couple years before she went to fire the CEO, which is kind of nuts. And here they seem to agree with what I said. But based on our experience, we believe that self-governance cannot reliably withstand the pressure of profit incentives. And that is what we're hearing from Ilya and Jan as well. They are optimizing for shiny new things, but not AI safety. So they go on to say, if any company could have successfully governed itself while safety and ethically developing advanced AI systems, it would have been OpenAI. The organization was originally established as a nonprofit with a laudable mission to ensure that AGI, or artificial general intelligence, AI systems that are generally smarter than humans, would benefit all of humanity, quote unquote. But later, a for-profit subsidiary was created to raise the necessary capital, but the nonprofit stayed in charge. The stated purpose of this unusual structure was to protect the company's ability to stick to its original mission, and the company's mandate was to uphold that mission. It was unprecedented, but it seemed worth trying. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Now, again, this is why Elon Musk is suing OpenAI. If you're able to raise a bunch of funds for a nonprofit and you don't pay taxes on any of it, and then one day you can snap your fingers and become a for-profit company while benefiting from all of that nonprofit research, why wouldn't any company do that? And the answer is they probably would. And of course, it is a huge headache, a huge undertaking to set up these sophisticated corporate structures. But OpenAI did it, and they did benefit from all of those years and the hundreds of millions of dollars spent doing the research through the nonprofit entity. Last November, in an effort to salvage this self-regulatory structure, the OpenAI board dismissed its CEO, Sam Altman. The board's ability to uphold the company's mission had become increasingly constrained due to long-standing patterns of behavior exhibited by Mr. Altman, which, among other things, we believe undermined the board's oversight of key decisions and internal safety protocols. Now, it's kind of interesting. After all of it, the board was out. Sam defended against the coup. He is still on the Iron Throne and has more power than ever at OpenAI. And Microsoft and Satya Nadella came in and was a big influence over the negotiation process because, of course, with Microsoft owning 49% of OpenAI, they had a huge financial incentive to make sure that OpenAI's tech was fine. Sam Altman and Greg Brockman landed okay. And everything happened during that weekend, from Sam Altman and Greg Brockman and the rest of the OpenAI team were going to Microsoft, to maybe Microsoft was going to buy the rest of OpenAI, to finally, where it settled, Sam Altman back in the CEO chair. Multiple senior leaders had privately shared grave concerns with the board, saying they believed that Mr. Altman cultivated a toxic culture of lying and engaged in behavior that can be characterized as psychological abuse. Now, I struggle with this because what one person says is psychological abuse might just be a tough working environment. And maybe the person who said it is psychological abuse just didn't like the decisions that were being made. We don't actually know because we don't have the internal documents to make judgment on. And then finally, an internal investigation found that the board had acted within its board discretion, so they were allowed to do what they did to dismiss Mr. Altman, but also concluded that his conduct did not mandate removal. Now, OpenAI did an internal investigation. And by that point, Sam Altman was already running OpenAI. So how much confidence can you really have in that report? It's basically like asking a student to grade their own work. Now, here is a really important statement. We also feel that developments since he returned to the company, including his reinstatement to the board and the departure of senior safety-focused talent, Ilya and Jan, which I already discussed, bode ill for the OpenAI experiment in self-governance. Now, here's where I start to disagree, but I also don't have a good solution. But even with the best of intentions, without external oversight, this kind of self-regulation will end up unenforceable, especially under the pressure of immense profit incentives. Governments must play an active role. So I believe governments are extremely inefficient, and the more laws we put in place, the more regulation we put in place, the less innovation we're going to have, and the innovation we do have is going to be slow. And governments tend to be the least knowledgeable about these cutting-edge technologies. And not only that, when governments get involved, the largest companies, and let's just stick on the industry of AI, the largest AI companies are going to influence the government to write laws and regulation that make it harder for startups to come and threaten incumbents. And that is called regulatory capture. And that happens. Money influences government, government writes the laws, and then it just becomes much more difficult for startups to compete. But if governments aren't going to be playing a big role, as I don't think they should, who should? How do we structure these companies to not only benefit shareholders, but to benefit the world more generally? They talk a little bit about regulation, and I think they have a rosier picture of what regulation has done to a lot of industries. Certainly, there's been a lot of good regulation, but there's also been a tremendous amount of bad regulation. It is also far from clear that light touch regulation of the internet has been an unalloyed good for society. Certainly, many successful tech businesses and their investors have benefited enormously from the lack of constraints on commerce online. Very true. It is less obvious that societies have struck the right balance when it comes to regulating to curb misinformation and disinformation on social media, child exploitation and human trafficking, and a growing youth mental health crisis. Goods, infrastructure, and society are improved by regulation. I disagree. You cannot have a blanket statement like that. I don't think all goods, all services have benefited from regulation. In fact, there are many examples where it has actually been terrible. But it's because of regulation that cars have seatbelts and airbags, that we don't worry about contaminated milk, and that buildings are constructed to be accessible to all. All very true, but there's going to be counterexamples for every example that they put forth. And here they go on to talk about the pitfalls of poorly designed regulation. It can place a disproportionate burden on smaller companies, so that's what we talked about, stifling competition and innovation. It is crucial that policymakers act independently of leading AI companies when developing new rules. Now, how are policymakers going to act independently when they don't know about AI? That is not their area of expertise and likely never will be. So they have to listen to somebody. And who are the smartest people in AI? Well, they're usually either at research labs or, more likely, they're at these large tech companies. And so they have to listen to somebody. So I'll recommend checking out this article at The Economist. I'll drop a link in the description below to that. And now we're going to talk about one last thing. And this just might be the most laughable development that I've seen in a while. OpenAI board forms Safety and Security Committee. So basically, they're forming their own safety and security committee. Now, I hope they have some kind of counterbalance to just them making all the decisions, but let's find out. The new committee is responsible for making recommendations on critical safety and security decisions for all OpenAI projects, recommendations in 90 days. So the entire blog post is just these 5 small paragraphs. Today, the OpenAI board formed a safety and security committee led by directors Brett Taylor, Adam D'Angelo, Nicole Seligman, and Sam Altman. So the Safety and Security Committee is also including Sam Altman and other board members. This does not seem independent whatsoever. This committee will be responsible for making recommendations to the full board on critical safety and security decisions for OpenAI projects and operations. Now, here's something we did not know. OpenAI has recently begun training its next frontier model, and we anticipate the resulting systems to bring us to the next level of capabilities on our path to AGI. So there's the hint. They are training their next model. GPT-5, maybe they'll call it that, maybe they won't. While we are proud to build and release models that are industry leading on both capabilities and safety, we welcome a robust debate at this important moment. A first task of the Safety and Security Committee will be to evaluate and further develop OpenAI's processes and safeguards over the next 90 days. Now, Sam Altman and OpenAI have already proven themselves to not care much about AI safety. They really don't. And that is why Ilya left, that is why Jan left. And that is a lot of what caused the dust up during the previous OpenAI board and Sam Altman's duel. At the conclusion of the 90 days, the Safety and Security Committee will share the recommendations with the full board. Following the full board's review, OpenAI will publicly share an update on adopted recommendations in a manner that is consistent with safety and security. So basically, this smaller group is going to share it with the slightly larger group, both of which is controlled by Sam Altman, and if both groups decide it's okay, they'll share it publicly. Cool, thanks. OpenAI technical and policy experts, Alexander Madry, head of preparedness, Lillian Wang, head of safety systems, John Schulman, head of alignment science, Matt Knight, head of security, and Jacob Pachaki, chief scientist, will also be on the committee. Additionally, OpenAI will retain and consult with other safety, security, and technical experts to support this work, including former cybersecurity officials Rob Joyce, who advises OpenAI in security, and John Carlin. So basically, they gave us very little information. They just said, hey, we got it from here. We'll let you know what's safe and secure. I don't believe this for a second. So what do you think? With this new information, do you think the board was in the right to fire Sam Altman? Do you think this new safety and security committee that OpenAI formed internally is anything but a PR stunt? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.